Today, we're diving into the complete US P-series aircraft, from the early P-1 all the way to the advanced designs up to P-92. This series captures the full evolution of military aviation, starting with early biplanes, moving through the powerful propeller-driven fighters of World War II, and finally reaching the first generation of jet-powered aircraft. Some of the later aircraft, especially from the P-80 to P-92 range, mark the transition into modern jet fighters, and I've already covered those in detail in my F-Series video. If you want to explore that next chapter, click the link on your screen. In this video, we'll go through the entire journey, the technology, the designs, and the history that shaped air combat as we know it today. Let's begin.
The Curtiss P-1 Hawk first flew in 1925 and entered service that same August, becoming the very first aircraft to officially wear the new P designation. It was a simple wood and metal biplane, powered by liquid-cooled V12 piston engine, and it could reach a top speed of about 163 miles per hour. Early P-1 variants were typically armed with two 30-caliber machine guns. Mixed .50 or .30 armament appeared later on some derivatives, but was not standard on the initial P-1. It wasn't fast, and it did not see combat service with the U.S. military, but it started a long line of Curtiss Hawk fighters that would run all the way into World War II. The P-2 wasn't really a new airplane. It was 5 P-1 airframes built in 1925 with a bigger 500 horsepower engine, hoping for more speed and power. The Curtiss V1400 engine proved problematic and underperformed rather than being outright unreliable, leading to disappointing results in service, so most of these aircraft were converted back into standard P-1s within about a year. The P-3 first flew in 1927 using a Packard water-cooled engine in place of the usual Curtiss power plant in hopes of better performance. It reached a top speed of roughly 170 miles per hour and carried the same twin machine gun armament as the rest of the Hawk family. The improvement wasn't dramatic, so only a small number were built before the Army moved on to other designs. The Boeing XP-4 was an experimental 1920s American biplane built to test a supercharged Packard engine for high-altitude performance. Based on the PW-9 fighter, it featured an enlarged lower wing and other modifications to accommodate the heavier and more complex power plant. The aircraft was delivered to Wright Field in 1927 for evaluation. During testing, the added weight and drag from the engine installation reduced overall performance, making it inferior to the standard PW-9 it was derived from. The project was quickly abandoned after a short test program, and the prototype was grounded, marking it as an unsuccessful early attempt to integrate supercharged engines into fighter aircraft. P-5 Curtiss Superhawk. Nicknamed the Superhawk, the P-5 first flew in the late 1920s as another step in the Curtiss Hawk family's evolution. It reached an estimated 166 to 173 miles per hour and carried twin machine guns, but it remained a small-scale project rather than becoming a production fighter. The Curtiss P-6 Hawk first flew in 1927 and entered service in 1929 as one of the last and most refined biplane fighters of its era. Early versions reached speeds of around 180 miles per hour, while the improved P-6E variant could approach 195 to 204 miles per hour. It was armed with two 30-caliber machine guns and served as a frontline pursuit fighter with the U.S. Army Air Corps during the late 1920s and early 1930s. The P-6E in particular became famous for its colorful squadron markings, making it one of the most visually iconic American fighters of the pre-World War II period. The Boeing XP-7 first flew in 1928 as part of Boeing's ongoing fighter development based on the PW-9 series, reaching roughly 167 miles per hour and carrying twin machine guns. It never advanced beyond the prototype stage. The Boeing XP-8 was an experimental American biplane fighter developed in the late 1920s as part of Boeing's ongoing refinement of the PW-9 series. It featured a more streamlined fuselage and was powered by a Packard V1 500 liquid-cooled engine. It reached approximately 173 miles per hour and carried a pair of machine guns, but it was never ordered into production. The Boeing XP-9 first flew in 1930 and represented a major step forward as an early monoplane fighter at a time when biplanes still dominated military aviation. It was designed with a high-wing configuration and armed with two machine guns. The aircraft reached a top speed of around 213 miles per hour, but its handling characteristics were poor, largely due to its unusual layout. As a result, only a single prototype was built, and the project was soon abandoned. The Curtiss XP-10 first flew in 1928 and was an experimental fighter that explored an unusual gull-wing biplane configuration. It was armed with 2 machine guns and powered by a Curtiss V-1570 Conqueror engine. Although innovative in layout, the aircraft achieved a top speed of only around 215 miles per hour and did not offer enough improvement over existing fighters. Only one prototype was built, and the project remained a short-lived experiment. The Curtiss P-11 Hawk number was set aside for a version of the P-6 fitted with a new Chieftain engine. That engine overheated constantly during testing, so the whole idea was abandoned before it ever reached a usable top speed, and the airframes were converted for other uses instead. The Boeing P-12 first flew on June 25, 1928, and entered service in 1930. A total of 586 aircraft were built for both the U.S. Army and Navy, including the closely related Navy F-4B variants. It was powered by a Pratt & Whitney R1340 Wasp radial engine. Later versions reached a top speed of about 189 miles per hour. The P-12 remained a mainstay of American fighter units throughout the 1930s. The Thomas Morse XP-13 Viper was an experimental American biplane fighter that first flew in June 1929. Only one prototype was built for the U.S. Army Air Corps. The aircraft featured a unique all-metal structure covered in corrugated aluminum skin. It was initially powered by a complex Curtiss H-1640 Chieftain radial engine, which suffered from severe overheating problems. The Army later replaced it with a Pratt & Whitney Hornet engine, redesignating the aircraft as the XP-13A. With this engine, it reached a top speed of about 189 miles per hour. Because it offered no meaningful improvement over existing fighters, the project was canceled, and the sole prototype was lost in a crash during testing in 1930. Curtiss XP-14 was used for a proposed Curtiss version of the Viper with the Curtiss H-1640 1 Chieftain hex engine, but it never led to a production order. The Boeing XP-15 was an experimental American monoplane fighter that first flew on January 30, 1930. Only one prototype was built for evaluation by the U.S. Army Air Corps. It featured a parasol wing configuration derived from the P-12, using a similar all-metal fuselage but eliminating the lower wing. Powered by a 450 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R134 Wasp radial engine, the aircraft reached a top speed of about 190 miles per hour and was armed with 2 synchronized 30 caliber machine guns. Although it demonstrated good handling and performance, the parasol wing layout did not provide a sufficient advantage over existing biplane fighters, and the project was not pursued further. The Berliner Joyce P-16 first flew on September 1, 1930, and entered service in 1932. It reached a top speed of about 176 miles per hour at sea level and 186 miles per hour at 5,000 feet. The aircraft was armed with 2 fixed 30 caliber machine guns firing forward, 1 flexible 30 caliber machine gun for a rear gunner, and could carry 222-pound bombs. The P-16 was unusual as a 2-seat fighter, with a pilot and a rear gunner, and it became the last biplane fighter ordered new by the U.S. Army. The concept of a protected 2-seat fighter did not prove successful, and issues such as poor landing visibility limited its effectiveness. Although it saw only brief frontline use, it continued to serve in secondary roles for several years before being retired. The Curtiss XP-17 was an experimental fighter created by converting an existing P-1 Hawk airframe. Around 1930, it was fitted with an inverted, air-cooled engine to test alternative power plant configurations. The XP-17 remained a one-off experimental aircraft and did not enter service. The XP-18 and XP-19 was another Curtiss test design that never grew beyond the prototype stage. The YP-20 shows just how confusing naming got in this era, because it was actually a P-6 airframe fitted again and again with different engines and given a new number each time it changed. Converted in October 1930, it reached 188 miles per hour at sea level and carried 230 caliber machine guns. It lost a fly-off competition against a rival design and was converted once more afterward, eventually becoming the test bed that led to the famous P-6E. The Curtiss XP-21 was an experimental aircraft developed from a converted Hawk series airframe for testing new engines and equipment. It did not enter frontline service and remained part of ongoing experimental development efforts. The Curtiss XP-22 was an experimental development of the Hawk series that competed in a 1931 U.S. Army Air Corps fighter evaluation. Powered by a 700 horsepower Curtiss V1570 Conqueror V12 liquid-cooled engine, it proved to be the best performer among the competing designs, largely due to its record-setting top speed of 202 miles per hour and retained the standard armament of 2 machine guns. Its success led to a production order. However, rather than being designated P-22, the aircraft was standardized as the Curtiss P-6E. This version, retaining the powerful Conqueror engine and achieving a top speed of 204 miles per hour in its final production form, became one of the most refined and recognizable Hawk biplane fighters of its era. The Curtiss XP-23. Hawk was an experimental biplane built in late 1931. It was the last attempt by Curtiss to make a fast biplane fighter before the U.S. Army switched to modern monoplanes. Designers replaced the traditional fabric skin with a sleek all-metal body. They also gave the plane a long pointed nose to fit a 600 horsepower turbo-supercharged Curtiss Conqueror engine. During its test flights, the aircraft reached a top speed of 223 miles per hour. However, the complex supercharger system suffered from constant mechanical failures. The military soon lost interest because the new Boeing P-26 monoplane was faster and more reliable. The Army canceled the project after building just one prototype, which ended the era of Curtiss biplanes. The Lockheed YP-24 was an advanced experimental fighter that first flew in 1931, featuring an all-metal low-wing monoplane design at a time when most U.S. Army fighters were still biplanes. It achieved a top speed of about 235 miles per hour. Despite its promising performance, the sole prototype was lost in a crash during testing, which halted further evaluation. At the same time, Lockheed's parent company, Detroit Aircraft Corporation, encountered severe financial difficulties, preventing further development. Although the YP-24 itself did not enter production, its design was later developed into the consolidated P-30, which became the first production American fighter with an enclosed cockpit and retractable landing gear. Consolidated Y-1P-25. When the company behind the YP-24 folded, Consolidated Aircraft picked up the design and refined it into the Y-1P-25, which first flew in 1932 and reached roughly 247 miles per hour, carrying 2.30 caliber machine guns. It served as the direct ancestor of the next fighter in our story, the P-30. The Boeing P-26, nicknamed the Peashooter, first flew on March 20th, 1932, and entered U.S. Army Air Corps service between late 1933 and early 1934. It reached a top speed of 234 miles per hour and was typically armed with 1.30 caliber and 1.50 caliber machine gun, along with provisions for light bombs under the wings. Powered by a 600 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1340 Wasp 9-cylinder radial engine, the aircraft was produced in a total run of 151 units. It was the first all-metal monoplane fighter to enter regular U.S. service, although it still retained an open cockpit and fixed landing gear, reflecting a transitional stage in fighter design. The P-26 served as the Army's primary frontline fighter through much of the 1930s. A number of P-26 remained in service with U.S. and Allied forces in the Philippines at the outbreak of war in December 1941, where they saw limited combat during the early stages of the Pacific conflict. The Consolidated XP-27 designation was set aside for a proposed consolidated fighter planned with twin machine guns, but it never made it off the drawing board in any usable form. The XP-28 was a further consolidated experiment from the same family as the P-25 and P-30. It did not lead to any production orders. P-29. The Boeing P-29 first flew in 1934 as an advanced development of the earlier P-26, incorporating more modern features such as retractable landing gear and a fully enclosed cockpit. It represented a significant step forward in fighter design for the U.S. Army Air Corps. It was powered by a Pratt & Whitney R134035 Wasp 9-cylinder air-cooled radial engine. The aircraft reached a top speed of approximately 220 to 230 miles per hour and was designed to carry 2 machine guns. Despite its improvements, it did not offer enough advantage over competing designs to justify production. As a result, the XP-29 remained an experimental prototype and never entered operational service. P-30. The P-31 flew in January 1934 and entered service between 1934 and 1935 as the improved PB-2A, reaching 247 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, with the later PB-2A version reaching 275 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. It carried 2.30 caliber machine guns in the nose, plus one flexible .30 caliber gun for a rear gunner. The P-30 holds a genuine first in American aviation history. It was the first U.S. Army Air Corps fighter with a fully retractable landing gear, and the first with a supercharger that actually worked reliably in service. But it was a two-seat design, and the idea of a gunner in the back was already becoming outdated as single-seat fighters improved, so its frontline career was short. The consolidated P-31 number sat within the same consolidated fighter family as the P-30, but records of its exact performance are unclear, and it never became a distinct, separately produced aircraft of note. The Boeing P-32 was an experimental fighter project from the mid-1930s. The project did not progress far enough to produce. The consolidated P-33 was a proposed development of the P-30 that would have replaced the original inline engine with a radial power plant. The design did not advance beyond the proposal stage, and no aircraft carrying the P-33 designation was ever constructed. The Weddell-Williams X P-34 was a proposed fighter design developed by a company better known for its high-speed racing aircraft. The project aimed to apply racing design principles, such as streamlined aerodynamics, to a military fighter concept. Top speed was 308 miles per hour. The Weddell-Williams XP-34 proposal for the USAAC was originally designed around a 700-horsepower Pratt and Whitney R1535 Twin Wasp Junior radial engine. Later design revisions considered the more powerful Pratt and Whitney R1830 Twin Wasp or an Allison V1710 inline engine. The project did not advance beyond the proposal stage and was never built or ordered into production. The Seversky P-35 first flew on August 15, 1935 as the SEV-1XP prototype and entered U.S. Army Air Corps service in 1937. It reached a top speed of about 280 miles per hour and was typically armed with 1.30 caliber and 1.50 caliber machine gun. It was powered by an air-cooled, supercharged Pratt & Whitney R1830 Twin Wasp radial engine, which produced 850 to 1,050 horsepower. The P-35 represented a major step forward in American fighter design, featuring an all-metal single-seat monoplane layout with retractable landing gear and an enclosed cockpit. It served as the Army's primary fighter during the late 1930s. The aircraft was developed by the Seversky Aircraft Corporation, which was later reorganized into Republic Aviation, an important company that would go on to produce several notable U.S. fighters in the years that followed. P-36, the Curtiss P-36 Hawk, originally developed as the Model 75, first flew in May 1935 and entered U.S. Army Air Corps service in April 1938. It achieved a top speed of around 313 miles per hour and was initially armed with 1.50 caliber and 1.30 caliber machine gun, with later variants increasing the number of guns. The standard engine for the Curtiss P-36 Hawk, variants P-36A and P-36C, was the Pratt & Whitney R1830 Twin Wasp. The P-36 was a well-balanced fighter for its time, fast, durable, and highly maneuverable. Although it saw limited combat with U.S. forces, it played a significant role in foreign service. In particular, French-operated versions performed effectively during the Battle of France in 1940, where they accounted for a number of German aircraft. The design also served as the foundation for the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, one of the most widely used American fighters of the early Second World War. The Curtiss YP-37 first flew in April 1937 as an experimental development of the P-36, redesigned to use a turbo-supercharged Allison V1710 inline engine for improved high-altitude performance. The aircraft was expected to reach speeds in the neighborhood of 340 miles per hour. Armament initially matched the P-36 with 1.50 caliber and 1.30 caliber machine gun. However, the installation of the larger engine required a significantly extended nose, which forced the cockpit far to the rear of the fuselage. This arrangement severely limited forward visibility, creating a major operational drawback. Only a small number of YP-37 aircraft were built for testing, and persistent issues, including visibility and turbocharger reliability, prevented the design from entering full production or operational service. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning first flew on January 27, 1939, and entered service in 1941. Depending on the variant, it could reach speeds of around 414 miles per hour. Its concentrated nose armament, one 20mm cannon, and 4.50 caliber machine guns gave it exceptional firepower and accuracy. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning was powered by twin liquid-cooled Allison V1710 V12 engines. With its distinctive twin-engine, twin-boom configuration, the P-38 offered outstanding range, high-altitude performance, and speed compared to many contemporaries. It played a major role in the Pacific theater, particularly in long-range escort and interception missions. The aircraft was flown by America's two highest-scoring aces, Richard Bong and Thomas Maguire, who together achieved 78 aerial victories. A P-38 unit also carried out the famous 1943 interception mission that shot down the aircraft transporting Isoroku Yamamoto, a significant event in the Pacific War. The Bell P-39 Airacobra first flew on April 6, 1938, and entered service in 1941. In later versions, such as the P-39Q, it could reach speeds of about 375 miles per hour. Its primary armament was a powerful 37mm cannon firing through the propeller hub, supported by 2.50 caliber machine guns, and, in some variants, up to 4 additional .30 caliber guns. It was powered by a liquid-cooled Allison V1710 V12 piston engine. The aircraft had an unconventional design, with its engine mounted behind the pilot and a drive shaft running forward to the propeller. This arrangement allowed heavy armament to be concentrated in the nose and also contributed to its distinctive tricycle landing gear configuration. However, the removal of its turbo supercharger limited its effectiveness at high altitude, where it struggled against contemporary German and Japanese fighters. As a result, U.S. forces primarily used it in low-altitude roles such as ground attack and tactical support. The P-39 achieved its greatest success in Soviet service under Lend-Lease. Soviet pilots exploited its strong low-altitude performance, heavy firepower, and ruggedness to great effect, particularly against German aircraft and ground targets on the Eastern Front. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk first flew on October 14, 1938, and entered service between 1939 and 1940. Depending on the variant, it could reach speeds of around 360 miles per hour and was typically armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk was predominantly powered by the Allison V1710, a liquid-cooled V12 piston engine, one of the most recognizable aircraft of the Second World War. The P-40 became famous for the shark mouth nose art used by the American volunteer group, the Flying Tigers, who flew the aircraft in China against Japanese forces before the United States formally entered the war. Although it lacked the high-altitude performance of some later fighters, the P-40 was rugged, reliable, and heavily armed. It was produced in large numbers and saw extensive service across multiple theaters, including North Africa, the Pacific, and China, making it one of the most widely used American fighters of the early war period. The Seversky XP-41 first flew in March 1939 as an experimental development of the P-35, intended to explore improved high-altitude performance through turbo supercharging. It could reach speeds of approximately 323 miles per hour and retained the basic armament of 2 machine guns. It was powered by a single Pratt & Whitney R1830-19 radial engine. Only a single XP-41 was built, serving primarily as a test platform for engine and performance improvements. While it did not lead directly to a production aircraft, the data gathered from its testing contributed to the broader evolution of U.S. fighter design in the late 1930s. The Curtiss XP-42 first flew in March 1939, a converted P-36 used purely to test new engine cowling shapes designed to cut drag. It reached approximately 315 miles per hour, but it stayed a test bed rather than becoming a combat aircraft. The Republic P-43 Lancer first flew in March 1940 and entered service in 1941. It could reach a top speed of about 356 miles per hour and was typically armed with 2 50 caliber machine guns, with some variants carrying 4. Developed by Republic Aviation, the successor to Seversky, the P-43 represented an important step in fighter design, particularly through its use of a turbo-supercharged radial engine for improved high-altitude performance. However, it was not well suited for frontline combat due to limited protective features, and its service with the U.S. Army Air Forces was relatively brief. It saw more use in the China-Burma-India theater, where it was employed in both combat and high-altitude reconnaissance roles. Despite its limitations, the P-43's engine and turbo supercharger system directly influenced the development of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, which would become one of the most effective and widely used American fighters of the war. The Republic P-44 rocket was meant to be a bigger, more powerful follow-on to the P-43, planned with 4 machine guns. It was canceled before any prototype was ever completed because Republic's engineers had already moved their attention to an even bigger design, which became the P-47. The P-45 number was briefly set aside for an improved export version of the Airacobra, carrying the same armament as the standard P-39. In the end, the Army decided to keep using the P-39 designation instead, so the P-45 name was never officially applied to any production aircraft. The Curtiss XP-46 first flew in February 1941 and was designed as a potential replacement for the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, featuring a more modern and compact airframe powered by an Allison engine. It was expected to reach speeds of around 355 miles per hour. The Curtiss XP-46 was powered by a liquid-cooled Allison V1710-3 9V12 engine. Despite these improvements, the aircraft did not offer a significant enough performance advantage over existing and upgraded P-40 variants to justify disrupting established production lines during wartime. As a result, the project was canceled after prototype testing, and the XP-46 never entered production. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt first flew on May 6, 1941, and entered service in November 1942. It reached a top speed of about 433 miles per hour, with later long-range P-47N variants approaching 467 miles per hour. Armed with 8.50 caliber machine guns, it was one of the most heavily armed fighters of its time. It was built around the legendary Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp. It was unusually large for a single-seat fighter, earning the nickname the Jug, and it combined high-altitude performance with exceptional diving speed. Its rugged construction and heavy armor allowed it to absorb severe battle damage and still return its pilot safely, making it highly respected among its crews. Initially used as a high-altitude bomber escort, its range limitations were gradually overcome with drop tanks and improved variants. Over time, it became one of the most effective ground attack aircraft of the war, striking trains, tanks, and airfields across Europe while continuing to serve as a long-range escort fighter. The Douglas XP-48 was a proposed lightweight fighter design that never progressed beyond the concept stage, and no prototype was ever built. The Lockheed XP-49 first flew on November 11, 1942, and was developed as a more powerful successor to the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. It was powered by the new 24-cylinder Pratt & Whitney X-1800 engine. However, 2 months into the contract, the company decided to replace the X-1800 with 2 Continental XY-14301 inverted V-12, each producing 1,600 horsepower. It was expected to reach speeds of around 406 miles per hour. However, the experimental engines proved unreliable and delayed development, preventing the aircraft from achieving its intended performance. By the time the prototype flew, improved P-38 variants and newer fighters had already surpassed it. Only one XP-49 was built, and the project was canceled without entering service. The Grumman X P-51 flew on February 18, 1941, as a twin-engine fighter derived from the naval Grumman XF-5F skyrocket, adapted for U.S. Army Air Corps use. It was projected to reach speeds of around 424 miles per hour. It was powered by 2 Wright R-1820-67/699 cylinder air-cooled radial engines. Early testing showed promise, but in May 1941, a turbo supercharger explosion caused the aircraft to be lost over Long Island Sound. The pilot successfully bailed out, but the sole prototype was destroyed. With no additional aircraft under construction, the program was canceled, and the XP-50 never entered production. The North American P-51 Mustang first flew on October 26, 1940, and entered U.S. combat service in 1942. Early versions were powered by Allison V1710 engine and performed well at low altitude, but were less effective at high altitude. This changed when the design was fitted with the Packard V16507, a license-built version of the legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, built in the United States by Packard, which gave the aircraft excellent high-altitude performance. Later variants, such as the P-51D, reached top speeds of about 437 miles per hour and were armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns. With the addition of drop tanks, the Mustang gained the range to escort American bombers deep into Germany and back from late 1943 onward, a capability that significantly improved bomber survival rates. Mustang pilots were credited with destroying thousands of enemy aircraft during the war. After 1948, the aircraft was redesignated the F-51 and served as a fighter bomber in the Korean War, remaining in use with various air forces around the world for decades afterward. The Bell X P-52 was a 1940 fighter design that never progressed beyond the drawing board. It featured an unusual pusher configuration, with its propeller mounted at the rear of the aircraft and a forward cockpit, making it very different from conventional fighters of the time. The project was canceled in November 1941 before any prototype was built, as Bell shifted its efforts toward an improved design that became the Bell XP-59. As a result, the XP-52 remained an unbuilt concept and never entered testing or service. The XP-53 was Curtiss's second attempt at replacing the P-40, designed around a new Continental engine and planned to carry 8 .50 caliber machine guns. Development trouble with that engine, combined with the Army's growing interest in the Merlin, led to its cancellation in November 1941. Its unfinished airframe was handed over to a related project, the P-60, to help test Merlin engine installations instead. The Vultee X P-54 Swooze Goose first flew on January 15, 1943. It was an unconventional twin-boom fighter with a rear-mounted pusher engine and a highly distinctive design focused on heavy nose-mounted cannon armament. It was powered by a single Lycoming XH-247-01 liquid-cooled 24-cylinder H engine. The aircraft incorporated complex features, including a movable gun installation and an adjustable pilot seat to aid in aiming. Although it was expected to reach speeds in the low 400-mile-per-hour range, its actual performance fell short of expectations. Only 2 prototypes were built, and with more practical and capable fighters already in service, the program was canceled in 1944 without entering production. The Curtiss X P-55 Ascender first flew in July 1943 and featured a highly unconventional design, with a rear-mounted pusher propeller and forward canard control surfaces. It was intended to carry 4 20mm cannon and reach speeds of around 390 miles per hour. It was powered by a single Allison V1710-95 liquid-cooled V12 engine. However, the aircraft proved difficult to handle, particularly at low speeds, where it showed dangerous stall and spin characteristics. On November 13, 1943, one prototype crashed during a public demonstration in St. Louis, killing the pilot and people on the ground. Although additional prototypes continued limited testing, the design never overcame its handling problems. With better performing conventional fighters already in service, the program was canceled in 1944 without entering production. The Northrop XP-56 Black Bullet first flew in September 1943 and featured a highly unconventional tailless design with a pusher propeller, giving it a shape similar to an early flying wing. It was intended to carry a combination of cannon and machine guns and was projected to reach speeds of up to about 465 miles per hour. It was originally designed around the liquid-cooled Pratt & Whitney X-1800 engine. In practice, the aircraft suffered from major aerodynamic and stability problems. One prototype was lost in an early accident, and the second demonstrated persistent control issues during flight testing. Because of these problems and the availability of more effective conventional fighters, the program was canceled after only 2 prototypes, and the XP-56 never entered production. The Tucker XP-57 designation was set aside for a proposed Tucker fighter design, but it never advanced beyond paperwork, and no aircraft was ever built under this number. The Lockheed XP-58 Chain Lightning first flew in June 1944 as a heavily redesigned and enlarged development of the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. It was intended as a long-range heavy fighter or bomber interceptor, featuring a powerful nose-mounted cannon armament and provisions for a second crew member and defensive weaponry. It was ultimately powered by 2 Allison V342-024-cylinder liquid-cooled engines. Although it was projected to reach speeds of 436 miles per hour, the aircraft suffered from delays and increasing weight, which limited its performance. By the time it flew, U.S. fighter strategy had shifted toward more versatile and proven designs like the North American P-51 Mustang. Only one prototype was completed, and the program was canceled later in 1944 without entering production. The Bell P-59 Aerocomet first flew on October 1st, 1942, becoming the first jet-powered aircraft operated by the United States. It reached top speeds of roughly 413 miles per hour and was designed to carry a 37mm cannon along with machine guns. It was powered by two General Electric Type 1A turbojet engines. A total of 66 Bell P-59 Aerocomets were built. Despite its groundbreaking design, its early jet engines left it underpowered and unable to match the performance of contemporary piston fighters. As a result, the P-59 never saw combat and instead served as a training and experimental platform, preparing American pilots and engineers for more advanced jet fighters that would follow. The Curtiss P-60 first flew in September 1941 as part of an effort to develop a true successor to the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. The program evolved through numerous prototype variants using different engines and configurations, but persistent development problems and shifting requirements delayed progress. It could reach a maximum speed of 414 miles per hour. It was powered by a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800-5 318-cylinder air-cooled radial piston engine. Early versions failed to significantly outperform existing fighters, and although later variants showed improvement, they arrived too late. With more capable aircraft like the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt and North American P-51 Mustang already in service, the Army saw no reason to disrupt production. The entire P-60 program was eventually canceled without any production aircraft being built. The Northrop P-61 Black Widow first flew on May 26, 1942, and entered service in 1944 as the first American aircraft purpose-built as a night fighter. It reached a top speed of about 366 miles per hour and was armed with four 20mm cannon mounted in the belly, along with four .50 caliber machine guns in a dorsal turret on many versions. It was powered by two Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp 18-cylinder radial engines. Designed around onboard radar, the P-61 could detect and intercept enemy aircraft in complete darkness without relying on ground guidance. With its three-man crew and advanced electronics, it represented a major leap in night combat capability. The Black Widow served in both the Pacific and European theaters, and it is widely credited with achieving the final American aerial victory of World War II, shortly before the Japanese surrender. The XP-62 first flew in July 1943, a high-altitude escort fighter design, but as the war's needs shifted toward different priorities, only one prototype was ever completed, and the program was canceled in 1944 without reaching production. The Bell P-63, King Cobra, first flew in December 1942 as an improved successor to the Bell P-39 Airacobra. It reached speeds of around 410 miles per hour and was armed with a 37mm cannon firing through the propeller hub, supplemented by four .50 caliber machine guns. It was powered by a single liquid-cooled Allison V1 710 V12 piston engine. Although it was not used in combat by U.S. forces, the majority of production aircraft were supplied to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease, where they saw extensive operational use and made the Soviet Air Force the type's largest operator. A specialized training version, the RP-63, was converted into a manned target aircraft, fitted with armor and sensors so that trainees could fire frangible ammunition at it, safely simulating real combat conditions. The North American P-64 began as the NA-68, an export fighter built in 1940 for Thailand, then known as Siam. After Thailand aligned with Japan following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States seized the aircraft before delivery and redesignated them as P-64s. It was powered by Wright R1820-77 radial engine. Rather than being used in combat, they served mainly as advanced trainers within the U.S. Army Air Forces. The aircraft reached speeds of around 270 miles per hour and was equipped with a mix of .30 and .50 caliber machine guns, though its role remained limited to training and evaluation rather than frontline service. The P-65 designation was reserved for a proposed Grumman fighter, improved version of the XP-50 with two R2600-10 engines, but the aircraft was never built and the project went no further than early planning. The Vultee P-66 Vanguard first flew in September 1939 as the Model 48, originally intended for export to Sweden. After the outbreak of war, the United States blocked delivery and took control of the aircraft, designating it as the P-66. It was powered by a single Pratt & Whitney R1830-33 twin Wasp engine. Although it reached speeds of around 340 miles per hour and carried a mix of 2.50 caliber and 4.30 caliber machine guns, it was used primarily for training and was never employed as a frontline fighter by the U.S. Army Air Forces. Pilots appreciated its handling, but structural fragility, particularly with the landing gear, led to a number of accidents and its withdrawal from American operational use. Most surviving aircraft were later transferred to China, where they did see combat against Japan, though with mixed success, and were eventually replaced by more capable fighters, such as the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. The McDonnell X P-67 Bat first flew in January 1944 as a twin-engine interceptor, notable for its unusually smooth, aerodynamically blended fuselage and engine nacelles. It was designed to carry heavy cannon armament and was projected to reach speeds of around 405 miles per hour. It was powered by two experimental Continental 11-1430-17/1912 cylinder inverted V liquid-cooled engines. In practice, the aircraft's engines proved unreliable and underpowered, and its performance fell well short of expectations. After the sole prototype was destroyed following an in-flight engine fire in September 1944, the program was canceled without further development. The Vultee XP-68 Tornado was a proposed advanced Vultee fighter design. It was based on the experimental XP-54 Swooz Goose, but it never progressed to an actual aircraft, and no prototype was ever built. The Republic XP-69 was assigned to a proposed Republic fighter built around an experimental engine that never reached operational maturity. As a result, the project was canceled before any prototype was constructed. Republic's development efforts were subsequently redirected toward more promising designs, eventually contributing to aircraft such as the Republic P-84 Thunderjet. The Douglas P-70 Nighthawk was a night fighter conversion of the Douglas A-20 Havoc entering service in 1942. Equipped with early airborne radar, it reached speeds of about 339 miles per hour and was armed with 420mm cannon mounted in a belly pack. It was primarily powered by two Wright R2600 twin cyclone air-cooled radial piston engines. It served as an interim night fighter, while the purpose-built Northrop P-61 Black Widow was still under development and saw combat in the Pacific, including operations around Guadalcanal, where it was used to counter Japanese night raids. Although limited by early radar technology, it provided valuable experience in night interception before being phased out of frontline service and reassigned largely to training roles once more advanced aircraft became available. The Curtiss XP-71 was a proposed heavy interceptor designed as a bomber-destroyer, intended to engage and destroy enemy heavy bombers at long range using powerful cannon armament. The design emphasized size, range, and firepower over maneuverability. The project progressed only as far as a full-scale mock-up, and no prototype was ever built. Changing priorities and advances in fighter design led to its cancellation before flight testing could begin. The Republic XP-72 Super Thunderbolt first flew on February 2, 1944, as a high-performance development of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Powered by the extremely powerful Pratt & Whitney R4360 engine, it achieved speeds of around 490 miles per hour, making it one of the fastest piston-engine fighters ever built. It was designed to carry 6.50 caliber machine guns with an alternative configuration of heavy 37mm cannon armament. Although 100 production aircraft were ordered, the program was canceled in January 1945 as the U.S. Army Air Forces shifted focus toward jet-powered fighters, with Republic's efforts redirected to aircraft such as the Republic P-84 Thunderjet. The P-73 designation was an unofficial, contract-only label associated with Howard Hughes's D-2 aircraft project. It was never adopted as an official U.S. Army Air Forces designation and did not represent a distinct fighter type. The number 74 was simply never assigned to any aircraft, skipped over entirely in the sequence. The Fisher P-75 Eagle first flew in November 1943. Built by the Fisher Body Division of General Motors, it was an attempt to rapidly produce a high-performance interceptor by combining components from existing aircraft, including outer wing panels derived from the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, along with a powerful Allison V3420 engine. It has a top speed of 433 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. Intended to achieve exceptional climb and interception performance, the aircraft instead suffered from engine, cooling, and handling problems and failed to meet its projected capabilities. During testing, one prototype was lost in a high-speed dive, resulting in the death of its pilot. With only a limited number built and no clear advantage over established fighters such as the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt and North American P-51 Mustang, the program was canceled in October 1944. The P-76 designation was reserved for a proposed improved version of the Bell P-39 Airacobra, but it never progressed into a distinct aircraft. Instead, the development effort evolved into the more advanced Bell P-63 King Cobra, and the P-76 designation was never formally applied to a completed design. The Bell XP-77 first flew in April 1944 as a small, lightweight fighter constructed largely from wood, intended to conserve aluminum in case of wartime shortages. It reached a top speed of roughly 330 miles per hour, but its performance proved disappointing, largely due to limited engine power. It was powered by a 520-horsepower Ranger V770 inverted V12 engine. With the anticipated material shortages never materializing and the aircraft offering no advantage over established fighters, the program was canceled in December 1944 after only 2 prototypes were completed. The XP-78 designation was briefly applied to a project involving the installation of a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine into the North American P-51 Mustang airframe, replacing the earlier Allison engine. The designation was quickly dropped in favor of XP-51B, as the aircraft was simply a continuation of Mustang development rather than a distinct new type. This engine change proved transformative, giving the Mustang greatly improved high-altitude performance and turning it into one of the most effective long-range escort fighters of the war. The Northrop XP-79B Flying Ram made its only flight on September 12, 1945. It was an experimental flying wing fighter powered by 2 jet engines, with the pilot positioned prone inside the aircraft to better withstand high G-forces. It had an estimated maximum speed of 547 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. It was powered by 2 Westinghouse 19B, military designation J30, turbojet engines. The design featured reinforced leading edges intended for ramming attacks against enemy bombers, in addition to a planned armament of 4 .50 caliber machine guns. During its first flight, the aircraft lost control and crashed, killing the pilot. The sole prototype was destroyed, and the program was canceled immediately afterward. So now we've reached the P-80. The point where aviation steps into the jet age. Before you go further, here's something important. The P in P-Series stands for Pursuit, which was the original U.S. Army Air Corps designation for fighter aircraft. Later, this system was changed, and F for fighter became the standard designation, which is why aircraft like the P-80 were eventually redesignated as the F-80. So yes, they are essentially the same line of aircraft, just under 2 different naming systems. If you want to continue this journey and see how these aircraft evolved into modern jet fighters, click on this video and watch from the F-80 all the way to the F-92. I've covered everything there, from the first operational jets to the designs that shaped the future of air combat.